can start now. I think people are just joining in.
Yeah, whenever you are, it's 1:30 also, so whenever you want.
Okay, so good afternoon to all. Welcome to this first session of instrumentation and techniques. And we have 4 speakers today in this first session. The first 2 speakers are Girish and Girish and Srinath Reddy Patti. They both will speak for, P. Girish and Padmakar Parikar, and they both will Parihar, and they will speak for 30 minutes, and followed by Srinath Reddy Patti and Mani Khurana. They will speak for 15 minutes. So the first two speakers, I will give a note by the time you finish 25 minutes so that you can wrap up. And the next 2 speakers, I'll give the call by 10 minutes. So over to you, Girish.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So good afternoon to all of you. And okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thank you for the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. Thank you, everybody. So I'll be talking about some of the major results and operations and user-based details of AstroSat. 5 years of AstroSat has completed its 5 years of operation on 28th of September. Okay, so AstroSat is India's first multi-wavelength astronomy satellite. It was launched from Sriharikota on 28th of September 2015 into a low Earth orbit and a very low inclination angle. So these are all the different. It is a multi-institute, multi-nation mission. So ISRO is the major player in the AstroSat. And other players are TAFR, Indian Institute of Astrophysics, IUCAA, PRL, RRI, and Canadian Space Agency, and Leicester. So these people played different roles in realization of the different payloads. And IUCAA is helping out in the science operations and user support. So just to give an idea of how the orbit is, AstroSat is into a low Earth orbit of 650 kilometers. So the left side, you can see how exactly the inclination angle with respect to the equator. It is launched to some 6 degrees a bit. And on the right side, you can clearly see that, okay, over a day, how the different passes actually cover different areas of the globe. And initially, we had 2 ground stations, Bangalore and Biak in Indonesia. Later on, we are now operating only with Bangalore station. So just to give an introduction of AstroSat, AstroSat mainly have 5 science payloads and 1 auxiliary payload. So out of the 5 payloads, ultraviolet imaging telescope, soft X-ray telescope, and large area X-ray proportion counter and cadmium zinc telluride imager are co-aligned and can observe a particular source simultaneously. Scanning sky monitor is a different one. It is actually kept around 90 degrees away from these co-aligned instruments. And in addition to these 5 science payloads, we also have a charge particle monitor to actually inform about the charge particle density at a given in situ measurements of charge particle monitor. This is to help us in avoiding damage due to SAA region, South Atlantic Anomaly region. AstroSat covers in a very broad energy band from near ultraviolet to very high energy X-rays along with soft X-rays. It has imaging, timing, and polarimetry capability. Polarimetry I have underlined just to show that polarimetry was not initially it was not planned, but CZT detector on board AstroSat is giving very good X-ray polarization measurements. So this is a schematic of the energy coverage of AstroSat. You can see that other than UV, you can see a clear overlap and continuous energy coverage almost from 0.3 keV to 100 kV. So major science objectives and a niche area, niche and a science pay of ASTROSAT are to understand high energy processes in binary systems, magnetic fields in neutron stars, study of star forming regions, high energy processes in extragalactic systems, and limited high angular resolution deep field UV survey. So the niche area, the major ASTROSAT has simultaneous multi-wavelength observation capability, as I mentioned already, from UV to soft and high energy X-rays, and it can have coordinated observations with ground observatories. So that makes it special compared to other instruments. So these are the two image pictures taken, one taken just before the launch at Sriharikota range, and another one is PSLV C30 carrying ASTROSAT along with it. So just to give an overall statistics, ASTROSAT has completed 5 years of successful orbit operations in September. So it has completed as of September 28, 26,945 orbits. So and observed a total of 1,905 total sources. Out of them, 1,173 sources are distinct objects. So ASTROSAT has generated a total of 17 terabytes of science data and downloaded so far. And for doing all these things, so ISSDC has uploaded almost 8 lakh commands to carry over all these operations. So on an average, 450 commands are uploaded from ISSDC to ASTROSAT regularly. So I'm coming to the source selection criteria. ASTROSAT is a very, very complex mission, and also it is sensitive to high bright light to avoid the damage due to bright light from sun or moon or even earth. So there are a lot of constraints put on ASTROSAT operations. So the major ones are roll axis, and the sun has always maintained above 65 degrees. Yaw axis, which is given here, yaw axis, and sun always to be more than 100 degrees. And the pitch axis and sun, this has to be around 90 degrees plus or minus 5. So this is for the power generation. So because the ASTROSAT carries 2 power solar panels, and even though it has SADA, which can move solar panel, but the pitch angle is necessary to maintain sun to shine on these solar panels. So the roll axis and velocity vector, that is ram angle, is always maintained more than 20 degrees. This comes because of the UV. So UV sensitivity can be degraded by contamination. Even one monolayer of contamination can actually reduce the sensitivity significantly. So to avoid fluffing the charged particles, so we always maintain the satellite such that it will not fluff through the charged particle area. For example, this is a velocity vector, and the angle between the velocity vector are in the direction with which ASTROSAT is moving. So and the pointing angle, it's always maintained more than 12 degrees. So finally, the star sensor and sun, that angle between these two are maintained more than 50 degrees. Sorry, I don't know how I can go back. Sorry, please give me a minute. Okay, so in addition to those constraints, so we also have constraints for spacecraft operations. As I mentioned, sun pitch angle is 90 degrees and plus or minus more. And in addition to that, we have onboard timer drift correction. We regularly maintain the drift within 100 milliseconds. And the gyro drift compensation values are tuned to control pointing error. So orbit determination is carried out daily, once at least. So orbit coefficients are uplinked on daily basis to update the onboard orbit model. And there are several macros continuously uploaded to the payload operations planner for South Atlantic anomaly, star sensor update to enable and disable command initiation, UV payload or imaging operation, when to start, when to stop, etc. And sun avoidance maneuver sequencer operation. Sun avoidance maneuver is when we are moving ASTROSAT from one target to another target. So on the way, it should not come across sun within the field of view. This is called a sun avoidance maneuver to safeguard the different payloads, especially UV and SXT. Sun avoidance maneuver is followed. And finally, for downloading the science data, the macros are enabled and uploaded every day. So this gives a complete overview of operations workflow of AstroSat, starting from POC users to finally getting the data. So a simplistic workflow is given here. It starts with a proposal. So submitting a proposal to AstroSat proposal processing system. AstroSat, these proposals are reviewed and verified by AstroSat time allocation committee and AstroSat technical committee. After the verification and after the clearance from attack and ATC, it is actually accepted for observations and it is scheduled using a planner. This schedule is the macros for this scheduling is sent to AstroSat, and the data from the AstroSat is dumped to ISSDC, and it is actually the data will be total of all the 5 payloads along with other housekeeping data. So DIPEP actually splits this data into different payloads and also adds the required AX data. And adding the AX data and making it into a FITS file is done at using the DIPEP, and this is called as L0. So this L0 data is converted into L1 by adding auxiliary data required for processing along with housekeeping data and timing information, OBT data, etc. And so this L1, what we call level 1 data, is sent to POCs for actually creating the L2 data, that is level 2 scientific data. So level 2 scientific data differs from payload to payload. For example, for UVIT, it may be images, whereas for LAXPC, it will be energy light curves. So like this, it will be different. So L2 data comes back to AstroBrowse, where both L1 and L2 will be archived. This this data will be immediately sent to the proposer, and after the 1 year of lock-in period, so the data is made public to all the people in addition to proposer. So this is about the normal announcement of proposals received under announcement of opportunity. In addition to the normal AO, we also have a target of opportunity proposals. So under which you can anybody can actually send a proposal for some, say, studying a transient or some event which is not expected in beforehand. And this target of opportunity, the turnaround time is very, very less, within 2 days, and sometimes it goes to a little more than that, depending on the proposer's requirement. So that target of opportunity data also follows almost all the things. Instead of attack, it will go through TOO committee, target of opportunity committee. After that, everything is similar to the announcement of opportunity, except that there will not be any lock-in period. So the data is made public immediately as soon as it reaches the AstroBrowse. So the data pipeline mainly involves proposal processing, and other things are taken care of by MCAP. So the payload data processing chain at ISSDC, it first splits the data into instrument-based data, and it is made available for level 0, level 1 processing. So auxiliary files are added into the level 1, and the housekeeping data is generated along with the timing information. So the process, this L1 or level 1 processed files are sent to POCs for converting it to level 2 data and for checking. So finally, the level 2 higher level data products generated at individual POCs are sent back to ISSDC and archived there. Most of this work is fully automated. So very rarely manual intervention is required in some of the payload data. So observation statistics. So as of September, a total of 1,905 observations are taken, and out of them, 1,173 distinct targets are observed. So this pie chart gives the share or split of these 1,173 targets. So you can see that UV imaging telescope constitutes the maximum share, followed by LAXPC, large area X-ray proportional counter, and soft X-ray telescope. And SSM is, this data is actually calibration data, because SSM is not a pointing instrument. So it is a scanning monitor, so it can cover the entire sky. This 2% is only for the calibration. And the CZT, this is a partially only a few sources along with the calibration. So this plot shows the distribution of different targets over entire sky. So you can clearly see that the different observations with different force payloads as the prime instrument. Please note that. So even though I have said, okay, green corresponds to SXT, it do not mean that LAXPC has not made the observations at that time. So because it's a simultaneous observations, unless UVIT is, there is a safety problem with the UVIT. So all the 4 payloads can observe all the data. So here, whatever I'm mentioning it as UVIT, LAXPC, SXT, and CZT are the primary instruments. The remaining 3 will act as so non-primary instrument. But for most of them, all the 4 data from all the 4 payloads will be available. So this actually plots 1,148 sources targets, and 25 targets are blank sky measurements for calibration purpose. So you can clearly see that UVIT actually constitutes a maximum distribution, followed by SXT and LAXPC. And just to give an idea, like you can clearly see that around 0 degrees, there seems to be a gap. This gap is because of the ram angle constraint because of UVIT safety. So I just want to point out that, so CZT seems to have observed very few targets, but CZT beyond 100 keV acts as an open detector. So that, even though not planned earlier, can help in the detection and study of gamma ray bursts. So here is a total number of gamma ray bursts as observed by cadmium zinc telluride imager given by Varun Balarao and CZTI team. So it has observed totally 434 gamma ray bursts are detected till now. Out of that, 260 they could actually triangulate and identify the position. So this was updated 2 days back. So this is the latest as observed by CZT. So coming to publications, till 2020, that is December 2020, AstroSat has a total of 44 referee publications, along with 324 gamma ray circular network notices and astronomy telegram of 24. So this plot shows the way the number of publications are increasing with over the years. So you can see that there is a trend of continuously increasing the publications. And so the last year and 2020 and 2019, so it's a coincidence that both the times, so there were 32 publications were published. So on an average, we are getting around 3 publications every month. And in the first 2 months, we already have some 14 publications in 2021 itself. So these are the publications again split over different payloads. So LAXPC has produced the maximum paper publications using AstroSat data, followed by SXT and UVIT. You please note that the total number of these publications might be slightly higher than the 144 because so some of these around 14 of them use multiple payload data for the publications. So as AstroSat is actually realized as a multi-wavelength observatory, so even though the number is less, we are actually working towards that to improve the multi-wavelength usage of AstroSat. So whatever the 11th that AstroSat, this one, so it do not mean that AstroSat has published only 11. This is completely instrument data using only AstroSat, overall AstroSat instrumentation. So that's why it looks very, very small. So again, coming to the different themes, the science themes, you can see that X-ray binaries has the maximum number of publications with 58. It is commensurate with the LAXPC observations, which actually with it's a very high effective area, actually contributed to a lot of QPO and other timing studies. So this is followed by instrumentation papers, 24. In the science wise, the AGN blazars and star formation clusters, they are 20 and 15. So this is a GRB studies, so that 12 is a additional, you can say bonus, because it was never meant to be a GRB study paper, instrument. So coming to users, so as of 2020, we have 1,674 registered users of AstroSat out of 48 countries. So this pie chart shows the distribution of the users. as it's clearly seen that India is contributing to highest number of registered users, followed by Russia, sorry, United States of America, which is 174. So I have not put those nations which has only less than 10 users, registered users. All of them from 32 countries comes to 276. So AstroSat, coming to AstroSat proposals, AstroSat is operated as a proposal-based observatory. So the data or proposals are solicited in different proposals. So initially it was performance verification immediately after 6 months or till 6 months after the launch of AstroSat. So performance and verification phase was there. This was followed by guaranteed time of observation, that is for another 6 months. So then these two are closed now. It's not open. Remaining we have regular calibration proposals followed by announcement of opportunity. Currently, AstroSat is serving 10th cycle under announcement of opportunity A10. So target of opportunity, which is open throughout the year with a very fast turnaround time. Currently, we are observing under T03 and which will be changed to T04 too soon. So totally we have observed 909 targets under multiple announcement of opportunities, including guaranteed time, and 264 targets under target of opportunity. So just to give a overall view of what are the kind of proposals we are getting. So I'm just giving the statistics corresponds to the last or the one which is under servicing now. So the observation period for A10 is October 22-21, September 2021. So total, we have received total of 105 proposals. So this 105 proposals may look too less, but you know please note that. So some of these proposals have multiple targets. For example, one of the proposals have almost 87 targets, and another one has 100 targets. So the total number of targets requested for observations will be much more than 105. So many of them have a minimum 2 or 3 targets. So out of these 105 proposals, 68 proposals are from India and 37 proposals are submitted by international astronomers. So they are respectively 6.11 milliseconds, megaseconds, and 5.78 megaseconds. So India has requested the maximum for SXT data 52% and UV data followed by UV data 36%. Whereas internationally, the maximum request was for the UV observations, that is at 54%, followed by in the SXT data 42%. So just to give you an idea, so we have actually opened a new proposal, new observation cycle. It will be open on Monday, 22nd February 2021, and it will be open for submitting proposals for 1 month. So ISRO, to encourage usage of AstroSat data, started a new initiative. So to fund AstroSat data utilization. So we actually provide limited funding for JRF positions. So we cover JRF fellowship, HRA, and computing and the travel and contingency. The initial provision for these projects are 10 JRFs plus 2 PDFs per year, and initially for 3 years. If the JRF registers for PhD, it can be extended by another 1 year. So we are planning to actually support 30 JRFs plus 6 PDF. So, and in 2019, we have received 19 applications, and these applications were reviewed by the chair of AstroSat Time Allocation Committee, Professor KP Singh, and they selected 12 JRF, ranked these 19 proposals, and from those, the top 12 JRFs are selected. And these top 12 JRFs are from 4 universities, 2 colleges, ICER, and 4 private university and institute. In the second year, so we have already supported 9 more JRFs and 1 PDF. So the next announcement for the third year of funding is planning to be released in March 2021. So as of today, so AstroSat is ma'am, I'm finished. 2 more slides. So AstroSat is currently satisfactorily working, and SXT and CZTA is working from day 1, and FUV and visible channels of UV are working satisfactorily. So second, LAXPIS Large area extra proportional counter 2 is working satisfactorily, whereas the LaxPC 1 is working at a lower gain, and the 2 detectors of SSM are working. So NUV stopped working from the third year of AstroSat operation, whereas LaxPC 3 was stopped because of gas leakage in the second year of operation, along with the SSM detector. So AstroSat is a very, very complex and multi-observatory and multi-institute observatory. So there are lots of hundreds of people involved in that one, starting from Professor P.C. Agarwal, who is the first PA of AstroSat, and Professor Kameshwar Rao, who actually came up with the UVIT and other things. So it's very tough to actually mention all the people. I thank all of them, whoever was directly or indirectly involved in the realization of AstroSat. So I am mentioning here a few people who are actually still working now, currently involved in day-to-day operations of AstroSat. Dr. S. Sita is the principal investigator of AstroSat, and followed by the multiple centers of ISRO are taking care of the day-to-day of the operations of AstroSat, starting from ISRAC, which is mainly responsible for proposals, receiving, proposal opening, archival, dissemination of data, finally scheduling the data target and data download. So URSC is involved in helping with the planning of the observations. SSPO, the ISRO headquarters, is Dr. P. Srikumar is advising in the day-to-day activities. So coming to the successful continuous working of AstroSat, there are multiple committees and people involved in it. So AstroSat Science Working Group, chaired by Professor Deepankar Bhattacharya, is actually advising the activities of AstroSat. AstroSat Project Management Committee, chaired by Dr. V. Kotesh Rao, is helping us in actually hardware whenever there is a problem with any hardware. AstroSat Time Allocation Committee is chaired by Professor K.P. Singh, who will be reviewing all the proposals submitted under different ABO. And Target of Opportunity Committee is chaired by Professor S.K. Ghosh, who will be reviewing the proposals submitted under Target of Opportunity. And AstroSat Time Technical Committee, chaired by Professor Gulab Devangan, will take care of the technical feasibility of AstroSat proposals. In addition to them, different payload operation centers at the different centers are responsible for level 2 generation and safety checks. So Ayuka is helping AstroSat in the support user support activities. So I'm just leaving this with the next call for proposal 2 deadlines. Next call for proposal is starting on 22nd February, and the call for funding for data utilization is going to be coming up in March 2021. I'll leave this with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Girish, for that summary. Any questions? I don't see anything on the chat box. Is there anything in Slack? If not, thank you once again, Girish, Dr. Girish, and we will hope to see many more results coming from AstroSat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
The next speaker is Dr. Padmakar Parihar. He will be talking about creating a large optical NIR near infrared observing facility in India. Over to Parihar. Can you unshare?
Yes. Just doing this. Is my screen visible?
Yes, and we can hear you too.
Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon. Before I begin my presentation, I like to express my sincere thanks to SISOC for giving me opportunity to speak about a subject which I believe is very important for our community. So I'll be talking about a subject which is linked to creating large optical near-Earth observing facility in India. That means installation of a large telescope. My presentation is divided in this way. Few slides on why we need a large telescope. We don't need to discuss too much on this, but this is just to have some completeness in the presentation. I have included the slides. Then I will give a very brief history of India's large telescope projects. It's not new. We have been talking about large telescope for more than 30 years. So what has happened in the past, I just summarized in 2 slides. Then in the world, how world is having bigger telescope, what kind of telescopes worlds are having, that is actually shown in a few slides. After this, I will come to the core part of my presentation, that is, what are the challenges we have in building large telescope and what can be the solution. Then urgent call. Okay, so our community is no doubt growing very fast. At present, we have roughly 200 plus optical and near-Earth astronomers, which includes from different institutions. Every year, we produce 25 to 30 PhD candidates. And at the same time, we are also receiving many PhD holders from outside the country. We have created many centers in over last few decades. We have created many centers, and these centers, many faculty have joined as a practicing astronomers. So this is one reason I believe that we should have a large telescope. In the same time, if you look at the Asia, it's a map of the Asia. So except the Japan, which of course has a large telescope of 8-meter size, none of other Asian countries are having a bigger telescope, despite they are actively involved in astronomical research. So starting from Egypt, Iran, many former USSR countries, Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, South Korea, Taiwan. There are many institutions dedicated for astronomy, thousands of astronomers, but no access to bigger telescope. So in Asia, we should have a large optical near-Earth telescope. In India, the situation is very bad. Most of community has access to only a 1 to 2 meter size telescope. Situation is now a little better because of 3.6 meter Devasar telescope, but we can't be so happy having just 3.6 meter telescope. The one good thing is that India has joined to mega project, one of the major project TMT, and we will be having world best facility. We will be having access to world best facility soon. But despite all those things, there are many things which can't be done by either 3.6 telescope or 30-meter telescope. The community needs a dedicated observatory class facility of 8 to 10 meters or 12 meter size, having a variety of instruments so that they can do whatever science they want to do. idea to build larger telescope in India is not new. Even during construction of VBT telescope in Kodaikanal, it was Venu Bapu who chaired a committee to look for future in the future program for optical astronomy, and they realized that in the plane of India, getting a world-class site is difficult. So that's why he suggested to the committee suggested to look trans-Himalayan region for future observatory. In 1989, a committee chaired by B.V. Srikantan recognized the need for a national large telescope at suitable site. In 1987, J.C. Bhattacharya suggested to establish a 4-meter class remotely operated telescope at high altitude site in Leh. And in fact, some study, not some, a very extensive study was conducted for many years in and around Leh to survey the site. Then later in 1996, a proposal was submitted to Government of India to build a large telescope of 4 to 6 meter size. And committee chaired by Dr. Kasturi Rangan actually recommended to go for large telescope. In principle, they agreed to go for large telescope. But what they suggested is let's have 2 meter class telescope first installed, infrastructure created. And after successful completion of this phase, when India can go for larger telescope, that was the idea. And with this goal, the 2 meter telescope was installed in 2000, and since 2003 it is working. In 1998 to 2001, there was effort to join GTC. A DPR was prepared by a group of astronomers, leading astronomers of India, and it was submitted to DST. But the proposal was turned down by the expert committee due to many reasons. In 2006-07, again, IIA astronomers resurrected the idea of building large telescope. ILOT project, Indian Large Optical Telescope project was initiated, and a serious effort was put to create science cases for 10 meter class telescope, as well as further explore the site, primarily the Hanle site. In the meantime, offer came to join one of the GSMT project, GMT, TMT, and ELT. And after a few years exploration, India joined to TMT project, and ILOT activity almost subsided because the group which was working for ILOT or NLOT got involved into TMT, and not actually attention was given to ILOT. Then again in 2015, IA director constituted a new committee and some development activity started. In 2019, we actually had a workshop on National Large Optical Telescope. And in the same year, a proposal has been submitted to DST to secure funding to carry out some initial activities toward building large telescope, mainly the technology part. This is the overview of large existing telescope, what the world is having starting. I have just mentioned only 8 meter telescope, 8 meter and above. There are many such telescopes working all over the world. And not only activity has not just stopped. Many other groups are building again 6 to 8 meters, 12 meter class telescope, and a few of them are here. One telescope project which may interest us is Chinese 12 meter CLOT project, as well as MSc 10 meter, and they have made a very promising progress toward realizing their telescope. After VBT, India has not built any, design and build any telescope by their own. Building a 10 meter class telescope entirely by Indian community is, whether we admit or not admit, but building a 10 meter class telescope entirely by Indian community is a big challenge that we have to actually accept and then work accordingly. For the success of the project, a very strong national and international cooperation is required. And what I believe is, despite not having domain knowledge, the private industry in India can play a very important and crucial role to build 10 meter class telescopes. So let us talk about the challenges. What we have. The first challenge is what I believe is the site. A world-class observatory requires a world-class site. A site which should cover near ultraviolet visible as well as a near IR, and such observation is only possible if you go to very high altitude cold desert place like Hawaii or Chile or in our Trans-Himalayan region. The best site, I have given some the parameters of the best site. These parameters characterize the site, like seeing should be somewhere 0.6 to 0.8 hours second, the clear night should be 70 to 90%. The sky should be very, very dark. The precipitable water vapors should be very minimal. The wind should not be too much. For the efficient use of adaptive optics, the coherence time and isoplanetary angle should be, coherence time should be large, both should be large. If you don't talk about KIC, the Monarchia, then it looks like we can think of three places where our 10 meter telescope can be installed. The one is, I'm not again opening the Pandora box, this is just possibility that, okay, before deciding the site, we can rethink where our telescope should go. So one is Chile, which will be in the southern hemisphere. Other very good site is in our neighborhood, that is in Uzbekistan, Madnik Observatory in Uzbekistan. An extensive survey was done by a group of scientists while searching for a site for ELT. And then, of course, in our own territory, we have many sites in Ladakh region, as well as in Uttaranchal, like Devasthan. We believe that the site at Hanle, IO Hanle, is one of the best. If you compare one of the best, and it is best suited for 10 meter class telescope, many parameters are very promising, and this is the comparison table, comparison between IO Hanle and the Monarchia, and almost all parameters are like Monarchia, except the seeing. And also we don't have much idea about the turbulence profile. So seeing seems to be a little poor in Hanle, but the seeing measurement is carried out at this peak, which is 4,200 meters from mountain. This is a local hillock surrounded by taller peaks. And there is a strong feeling that seeing is poor here but it may be good in nearby taller peaks. So the new telescope can be located into some of these peaks, any of these peaks. For that purpose, we have to carry out very extensive seeing monitoring exercise as well as turbulence measuring effort. So, of course, there's no doubt that Hanle is a good site, but at the same time, we can think other possibilities. The other thing is budget. For success of any project, it is important that we should have budget, sufficient budget. But building a large telescope is not a simple job. In this table, I have collected, actually I have given the cost of the telescope in USD $1 million. And we can find diversity in the cost, though telescopes are almost of similar size, 8 to 10 meters. But starting from 25 here in the existing one, $25 million to $160 million or $178 million, kind of diverse values we can see. And these are because of different approach, different design, they have opted to build a telescope. So roughly it looks like 100 to $300 million or 1,000 to 2,000 rupees crores may require. And this is not going to be a small amount. The reason is that India has already committed to spend 15,000 crore for the TMT, another 15,000 crore for the LIGO. Now securing 2,000 to 3,000 crores for a large optical telescope is a big challenge. And we should actually seriously look at the cost involved and try to go for optimum costing. So telescope cost can be minimized by going with smart design, as much as possibly making use of the existing fluent technology, based on competitive use of the industry, increased community involvement, and so on. And that is reflected in these two actually examples, how cost can be controlled. So Keck 2 telescope was built in 1997 by spending $82 million. But on the other hand, GTC, which is just replica of the Keck telescope, was completed in the 170, but almost 2 times more in 2007. And this difference cannot be explained in terms of inflation. So there is something beyond which actually increased the price. So that we have to take into account. Similarly, the KPNO 4-meter telescope was built by spending $45 million, whereas the Gemini 8-meter was built in $92 million. But if you use the scaling law, what I described in my previous slides, then the cost would have been $292 million. So instead of actually using $292 million, only $92 million was spent in building Gemini telescope. So this happened mainly because of technological improvement has made many things easy to fabricate, build, design. So technological advancement sometimes favors to reduce the cost. Sometimes, many times, it favors to reduce cost. Those things we have to take into account. And productivity of the telescope is not just decided by the cost. These are the very nice graphs in which you can see how productive or impactful these telescopes have been. So before arriving to any design, a rigorous cost benefit analysis is required. The goal should be developing a low cost, highly impactful telescope. The other thing is that designing a telescope as a whole, as well as its many subsystems. The design for this design, we need to create a top level science requirement, and then after mechanical control and instrument can be designed. The design process is very iterative before we converge to any baseline design, and it may take 1 to 2 years time. So science goal, requirement, telescope architecture, cost estimate, it goes on iterative. At the same time, there are various things which you have to consider and choose the one which is possible. There are sophisticated way to actually design the system, which I will not go here. Every subsystem of the telescope requires very careful design and analysis. A large group of engineers and scientists having domain knowledge has to work over many years, then only the job can be completed. The telescope of this complexity and scale is not possible to handle by in-house activities, that we have to admit. It's not possible that we can do all the tasks in our premises. So expertise exists in the industry for design and analysis should be very effectively used. There are many small and big design and analysis houses like Tata Consultancy Services, which design VBT, Hindusatech, Precision Precast Solution, the designer of the DOT dome, and many small to mid scale setup which can undertake design and analysis work. Building a large structure is really a big challenge. A telescope can be as massive as like 270 tons. This is Keck weight of the Keck telescope, and OTA itself is 109 tons. And dimensions are like 25, 30, 40 meters. Dome will be like, again, very huge, 1,500, 600 tons size dome. And so not only these are large structures, but these are large structures are linked with very high performance requirement. For example, the telescope of this size should have pointing accuracy of 1 arc-second or better. The tracking jitter should be less than 0.02 arc-second. Unguided tracking performance is expected to be 0.1 arc-second or better. So these are extremely stringent requirement for such large structures. So everything should be properly designed and manufactured. Building large structure usually happens in industry, at somewhere lower place. And then and many things is also constructed at the on-site, but carrying component of the telescope to mountain top is a challenge, and specifically when we have to go to, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to finish it. So these are a challenge, and of course the challenge of transporting component has reduced due to segmentation related technology, because that makes subsystem little smaller. Optics for the telescope can be built. Optics, when you say optics, then it comes to primary, secondary, and tertiary optics. And India's involvement to the TMT project is one of the best things what we have done. And it has made our job easy, that whatever is required to build primary mirror can be obtained through our participation to the TMT project. And a very excellent facility is created in the CREST campus, where the primary mirror segments will be fabricated, starting from mirror blind to polishing to hex cutting, pocketing, integrating with the SSA. Up to here, we will be doing job for the TMT, but this will give a unfinished segment mirror, which will have a large wavefront surface error up to 2 micron peak to valley is allowed. So further, it has to be polished using the ion beam figuring, and that is not yet, that is not planned. So India should also take initiative of actually getting ion beam figuring system and going through the trial runs. The secondary optics, secondary and tertiary optics are equally challenging task. They have their own complexities, both for optics as well as the mount and the drive. And not necessarily everything we should be doing ourselves. Some of the tasks can be outsourced. And one possibility is that a MOS kind of company can be asked to make secondary. The segmented mirror technology is, of course, not new. For many years, it has been in use. But despite this, there are many challenges in the segmented mirror technology. We have to make sure that all segments are aligned, co-phased, and maintained over a variable environment. And many segmented mirror telescope, many telescopes based on segmented mirror design have gone through a problematic period. 5 to 10 years have last, like HET and the SALT as well as LAMOST. So it's good time to actually spend some amount of time and money in exploring the technology by having the prototypes and doing some laboratory experimentation. The adaptive optics is another very important component of any large telescope. Otherwise, we can't expect to do many frontiers observations for many science. And these are working adaptive optics of many telescopes. In India, adaptive optics is not new. Many groups are working to develop adaptive optics, and almost 3 decades have gone in this. But now it's very high time they have to conclude and give a working adaptive optics to one of 2-meter telescope. After that, a much more complex adaptive optics system required for 10-meter telescope should be built. Adaptive secondary is another very important thing which now new telescopes are adopting. And this is fairly complex job. Only few groups have actually gathered capability to build adaptive optics, so adaptive secondary, and we should also invest in this. Building instrument is, of course, another big challenge, and there are in-house activities happening in many Indian institutions, but a lot more has to be done. Because building large instrument for large telescope is not a simple task. It's very expensive and time consuming and very, very complex things. I have given one example over here. So the cost can be few million to tens of million. And it's very complex. It may take many years. So we should start very serious effort toward designing prototyping some of complex instrument, as well as we should seek for international cooperations. This is the roadmap which I thought of putting here. And most important thing is this slide, the last slide. Please give me 1 minute time. So what I believe, I've just enumerated very important thing we should be actually doing in very near future. So the first thing what we have to do on priority basis is generating top-level science requirement by taking feedback from the optical IR community spread all over India. The work has already initiated by IIA, but it should be done on faster mode. For the historical region, large telescope activities are confined to mainly IIA and ARIES. Now time has come to form a group comprises mix of engineers and scientists coming from all institutions. So this is going to be international facility, not only national, but at least a proper representation from all representation, as well as actually involvement from all institutions, including universities, is required. We have to form the group, and groups should meet regularly. And one thing very important is not occasionally, but we have to have a national level meeting on every 6 months, because being such an important project, we can't do it on leisurely basis. There should be project management board and advisory body. The advisory body should have more international representation to get understanding and the feel for large telescope. Because what I believe that many of our engineers and scientists have not actually even seen the large telescope of 8 to 10 meter size. So this is for that, to get understanding and the feel for large telescope. The group members should visit all major observatories. Such visit will help for people to interact and collect more valuable internal.
I think you have to close now.
Yeah, that one. And generating a DPR for the 10 meter class telescope with and without seeking any funding from government is very important. And there should be a serious attempt to seek partners from Asian countries like Thailand, Taiwan, Indonesia, Egypt, Sri Lanka, and Nepal may be approached with a proper partnership proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Padmakar. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Amit Shukla has raised his hand. Go ahead, Amit.
Thank you, Sita. Hello, Paryaji. This is Amit from IT Indore.
Yes, please.
Yeah, a very good talk and very good idea. I think we should follow. But I have one small question. That recently I have heard that there are some groups in India. They are looking for some sort of renting some of the nights on the bigger telescopes. So my question is, if we make a consortium which can rent one of these large telescope of let's say 10 meter class, and not put this 15,000 crore at a stretch, and get well equipped with this renting kind of strategy for the TMP. So what is your suggestions or comments on this kind of thing?
Okay. I say very pertinent question. Whether we should buy telescope time or we should make our own telescope. So I believe we have to go with both. We should have actually access to larger telescope immediately, and actually it is delayed one. So over last 10 years we have been talking about sharing buying telescope time in either Gemini or Subaru or some other telescope. So we should get telescope time by paying. But at the same time, that is not going to fulfill the need of the entire big community. You have to please think about a community which is growing with this scale, will be how big. And none of these telescopes will give you more time. So 10 to 15, 20% may be all right. But what about 50, 100% time, right? So that is not possible to existing telescope, because they have their own programs. So in a smaller scale, yes, we should purchase telescope nights, but in longer run, we should make our own telescope. And 1500, the way India is investing in the science program, if you can invest 1500 crores for LIGO, then 1500 crores for 10 meter telescope in India is very much justifiable.
Okay, thank you.
Padmakar, there is a question in the chat box from Dr.
I cannot.
Is the
Okay, I cannot-
possibility of MSc collaboration and NLOT into a single facilities in Himalayas viable?
Okay. MSc is very specialized telescope. They have it's a very specialized telescope which will not meet the other general requirement. We need a observatory class telescope with different instruments and different capabilities. But we should share technology as much as possible for building a telescope.
Thank you, Padmakar. One more aspect I wanted to learn. What do you think is stopping what do you think is holding the adaptive optics being implemented with 2-meter telescopes?
Yeah, this is very important question, ma'am. What I believe is adaptive optics is not something which is high technology instrument now, at least. It was the case 30 years back, but not now. Looks like not very sincere effort, very sincere and focused effort is delaying the project. At least the natural guided star adaptive optics should happen within 2 to 3 to 4 years time. But why it is getting delayed is actually it's very difficult to explain.
So
Looks
you
like,
think it's more a decision making?
More a decision, more a lack of serious effort than anything else.
Thank you, Padmakar.
Smaller, yeah, but ma'am, the simple adaptive optics with natural guided star, laser guide, multi-conjugate adaptive optics for larger telescope is a challenge. That should take time, but not the simpler one what they're aiming for.
Thank you, Padmakar. We go to the next talk by Srinath Reddy Patti on Fourier transform and its application in LIGO analysis. Over to you, Srinath.
Hello, I am Srinath Reddy. My talk is optical Fourier transform and its application in low latency LIGO data analysis. First of all, I'd like to thank ASA committee for giving me this opportunity. These are the contents of my talk. First, I will give you the introduction, then LIGO data analysis, how is it done, then optical Fourier transform, what is it, and next comparison between the FFT and OFT, then conclusion and future work. So multi-messenger astronomy. What is multi-messenger astronomy? So we have various messengers of astronomy. Till 2015, we were completely relying on electromagnetic waves, but now we have moved on to gravitational waves and neutrinos. So recent observation of a gravitational wave event August 2017 is a best example for that. A short GRB is observed after 1.7 seconds after gravitational wave detection. Similarly, there was a high energy neutrino observed, which was coincide with a blazar. These are all multi-messenger astronomical observations. So with respect to gravitational waves, a follow-up of electromagnetic follow-up of the gravitational wave detection will help us a lot about understanding the source and its physical meaning. So near-time detection of gravitational wave will enable the multi-messenger astronomy, and rapid trigger generation from gravitational events is required for electromagnetic wave follow-up. Gravitational waves are excellent probes with respect to astronomy because they are not absorbed or scattered by matter and energy. Similarly, neutrinos are also very good probes because they are also very they are also not interacting with any other matter. So when we detect this using these probes, we get the information about the physical source without much distortion. Next, FFT is an algorithm to compute discrete Fourier transform. It is widely used in numerous applications. Coming to LIGO data analysis, this is the basic overview of the LIGO data analysis. The interferometer data is calibrated to find h of t time series data, that is gravitational wave strain data. Also, auxiliary and environment sensors are used to produce data quality. And if the data quality is above within the limits, then h of t is sent for searches using many CPU cores. Here, the first process is whitening. That is, we collect the auxiliary and environment from the auxiliary and environment sensors. We collect the power spectrum density, and we inverse that and multiply it to the h of t data to get the whitened h of t data, and that data is used is sent for template matching. Template matching is done using match filtering. If a gravitational signal is present in h of t, then a trigger is generated, and these triggers are of order of 10, and such signals are again put in for event validation. Here, some human intervention is done. Then, if it is in fact a gravitational wave signal, then the parameters are estimated like masses, spins, etc. And these parameters are also the results are produced within Bayesian limits, and this is sent to catalog for further analysis. There are many LIGO data analysis pipelines, but for online analysis, that is rapid analysis, we go for low latency pipelines, very short, which can give the expected gravitational wave expectation in the incoming strain data within short duration. There are 5 such low latency data pipelines. PyCBC is a Python-based compact binary coalescence search. CWB is a coherent wave burst pipeline, and OLIB is online LIGO inference burst. MBTA is multi-band template analysis, and GST-LOL is GStreamer based LIGO algorithm library. So these are all the low latency LIGO data analysis. The first step in many LIGO Virgo collaboration analysis is Fourier transform the time domain data using an FFT. So low latency LIGO data analysis algorithms such as PyCBC, etc. Also employ an FFT operation. So this is PyCBC live pipeline. In PyCBC live, match filtering is done to extract the signal from stationary colored Gaussian noise. The PICBC uses accurate models of gravitational waves. So these are first thing they do is they generate a signal to noise time series from using FIR filters. This FIR filter is equivalent to a matched filter. Why we go for finite impulse response other than infinite impulse response is because of the latency considerations. The FFT computed in this pipeline is of single precision floating point arithmetic. And for this data analysis, they downsample the data, LIGO data from 16 kilohertz to 2 kilohertz. So there will be different multiple nodes, and each node will compute its individual work pipeline, and there will be a supervising control node. LIGO Hanford Observatory and LIGO Livingston Observatory both detector data are accumulated in Atlas supercomputer, and from each node, if a signal is detected, it will be sent to a GRACE DB, with that is a gravitational wave candidate database. And as soon as it is sent to gravitational wave database, it will also alert the other electromagnetic community. So cluster nodes of supercomputer are used for low latency data analysis. Here, gravitational wave templates are grouped together in a similar duration and analyzed together. SNR calculation can be optimized using OpenMP and algorithms. Here, OpenMP is used within a node to parallelize, and MPI is used for parallelizing inter nodes, that is one node to other node. And Intel's MKL library used for instruction level parallelism. Compared to deep PICBC based offline analysis, which was used previously, this PICBC live pipeline is efficient, and it was able to identify 98% of sources in the injected data. So this is the
You have 5 minutes more.
Okay, thank you. This is the pipeline used. This is analysis stride. Analysis stride is the speed at which the data is analyzed, and it is generally 8 seconds. So these analysis segment N and analysis N+1 are also parallelized using pipelining method. That is actually the next segment comes during the first segment is in the process. Next, we go for optical signal processing. Optical signal processing, research in optical signal processing suggests that optical Fourier transform is faster than digital FFT, especially in case of large data. Here you can see in this graph, the 500 megahertz Xilinx Vertex FPGA processor and 1 gigahertz DSP processor and 3.474 gigahertz Intel processor. Compared to all these processors, OFT processing time remains same even though data size is increasing. What is OFT? OFT is optical Fourier transform. The optical lens makes the Fourier transform of input image in the back focal plane. Input image is realized using a spatial light modulator. Here you can see a spatial light modulator, and this is the lens. Lens can give the Fourier transform if we only consider the paraxial rays at the back focal plane. The speed of this optical system is determined by the SLM. What is spatial light modulator? Spatial light modulator is a device which modulates optical beam properties such as amplitude, intensity, phase, and polarization. This is a typical example is a liquid crystal on silicon LCOS SLM. Here, it is a linear SLM. Each pixel is separated by a interpixel gap. Next, comparison of FFT and OFT. I have computed FFT in my using NVIDIA GeForce GTX graphic card with 768 CUDA cores. As you can see, as the size of FFT increases, the computation time has increased slowly. But if we take OFT, it is determined by the SLM speed. Here, my SLM is operating at 1.8 millisecond, so it is at 1800 speed. Next, I have computed the FFT using i5 processor, which has 6 cores, so we can use 6 threads. Then using multi-threading, I have computed FFT. Similar trend goes for this FFT also. So the computation time increases gradually, but in case of OFT, it remains constant. So for FFT computation, for FFT, consider this as input signal. Then if this is a zoomed in version of this input, if we take the FFT output, it will be a single frequency sinusoid, and theoretically the SNR output is infinity, but if we calculate SNR using this FFT, we get order of 28. This is OFT model. Since each pixel as shown in this linear SLM, each pixel is having a fixed dimension. Here it is 1.6 micrometer. So we should consider that width of the pixel. So I have put a single data point in here. In this single data point, it is actually spread along a pixel in case of optical signal. So ideally, if we consider only ideal of optical Fourier transform model, then each pixel will be spread along the pixel without any gap, which will give an SNR of order of 10 power 8. Then if we include fill factor, that is a interpixel gap, then the SNR will decrease to 3 into 10 power 8, 10 power 4. If we further include cross pixel top, so sometimes the one pixel's behavior depends on the other pixel, then the SNR will further decrease. There may also be non-uniformity present in the SLM. There will be some sudden dip in the XLM pixels output. Then the SNR will be further reduced. But the best case can be obtained, the best possible SLM can be obtained is including fill factor, which cannot be avoided. But cross pixel talk and non-uniformity can be avoided by choosing a proper SLM. So in conclusion, OFT can be implemented to improve the computational speed of Fourier transform. Higher precision in Fourier transform computation is possible in analog OFT. In case of Fourier transform computation used earlier in PyCVC, it was a single precision floating arithmetic, but higher precision is possible in analog optical Fourier transform. Then with proper selection of SLM, it is possible to achieve better SNR. That is the fill factor OFT model. My further work is optical correlators can be used for excessively parallel matched filtering of gravitational templates. Here, this is an extension of just Fourier transform. Optical correlators where each template can be embedded into a hologram, and we can achieve maximum parallelization. These are the references, and thank you.
Thank you, Srinath. Any questions? Either on chat or raise your hand. If not, thank you once again, Srinath. And you can look at the Slack channel, see if the last speaker of the session is Mani Khurana, and she will be talking on the MACE, operation of MACE gamma ray telescope under partial moonlight conditions. Over to you, Mani Khurana.
Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm here to present the model which I have studied, that how to increase the duty cycle for MACE, which is a gamma ray telescope, under partial moonlight conditions. So in this talk, I'll talk about MACE, that is Major Atmospheric Cherenkov Experiment, its detection principle, and model to study the effect which affect the performance parameters. In this, I've considered basically two parameters, that is anode current and threshold energy. And at last, results and conclusion. So MACE is a ground-based gamma ray telescope. It is located in Hanle, Ladakh, at 43 kilometer height above sea level. Its size is 21-meter diameter, and pixel number is 1088. Or you can see number of PMTs used in the camera is 1088. It covers the energy range of 20 GeV to 5 TeV, and DC anode current is 0.7 microampere, which is due to the light of night sky. This is also called as imaging Cherenkov telescope, and these are generally operated during clear and moonless dark nights, such as to avoid the damage of PMT tubes due to excessive light. So, approximately over an year, we have 1000 to 1500 hours of detection. So, it is about 80% of duty cycle. So, MACE detects the Cherenkov light, which is produced by the charged particle when it travels with a speed greater than the speed of light in that medium. These charged particles are produced when a gamma ray, which has energy, enters into the atmosphere. It interacts and produces pair production, that is electron and positron pair. Due to pair production process, and these charged particles which are produced further undergo Bremsstrahlung effect and loses its energy in the form of radiation in the form of gamma. And these gamma is further used in the pair production, and this continues, and we get an extensive air shower.
Can you speak nearer to the microphone?
Yeah, sure. Is it fine now?
Yeah, better, much better.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So I have here I have a Cherenkov spectrum which covers a range of a 300 nanometer to 700 nanometer. Now, as I've mentioned that MACE detects in moonless night. So why moonlight is not considered during detection? As moonlight is a visible light, so it overlaps this spectrum, and we are not able to differentiate the Cherenkov spectrum and a light which is coming from the moon. So the model which I've considered is from the reference paper I've mentioned below. In this, there are two parts. One is B naught and one is B moon. B naught is the light due to the light of night sky. B moon is due to the moonlight, and this is dependent upon the ZM, which is zenith distance of the moon. ZS, zenith distance of the source. Alpha is the phase of the moon. Rho is the angular separation between moon and source, and lambda is the wavelength. Rho can be calculated if I have the knowledge of Zm and Zs. So by using this factor, I can calculate the flux due to moonlight, and I have to integrate that flux over the range of 300 to 600 nanometer I've considered. And I've also considered the effect of quantum efficiency of PMT, which are used in MACE telescope, and the mirror reflectivity. These both are wavelength dependent. So finally, I get the equation of anode current, which is in microampere, and also it depends upon the area of the telescope, which is 356 meters square, and gain of the PMT. It is of the order of 10⁴. So after, if I get the anode current, I've already mentioned that this depends upon the phase of the moon. I've plotted the anode current. In this, I've considered pore separation. As we can see, as separation decreases, this is the separation between the source and the moon. And I'm observing the source, so separation decreases, my anode current will increase. So effect of moonlight will increase. And also, I've shown the variation with the phase of the moon. So from the dark condition, I'm moving to the full moon condition, my anode current increases. And this line represents the DC background. This was due to the light of night sky. My second parameter is threshold energy. Threshold energy is a minimum energy that below which we cannot detect the gamma ray which is coming or interacting with the atmosphere. And for mace, it is 20 GeV. And this is dependent upon the flux of night sky. So if I consider in the moonlight, my background flux increases. So basically my threshold energy increases. So I've also plotted the threshold energy for different separation and with the phase of the moon. So it increases with the separation as separation decreases. So if I consider a case, or if I want to observe under moonlight condition, I should know the phase of the moon. If I know the phase of the moon, if I can do the observation, I can calculate the gain in time I can get. Earlier, without moon, it was 18%. I am mentioning it again. So how much more time I can get for my observation? So if I have the phase of the moon, that is theta, I can get the value of f. And from this graph, this I have taken from this reference, I can get the value of capital I from the this curve, and from there I can get the value of fm. Fm is the number of observation hour in partial moonlight. So this gives me the extra time I can utilize for my observation. I'll explain this whole thing with an example. So if I set my cutoff for PMT to be 3 microamperes, I'm doing particularly for this separation 88 degree. So I get the maximum phase I can get is around 20 degree. So my phase will be 20. So theta will be 20. I can get the value of f, and similarly I get the value of fm from that is 23%. So ultimately I'm getting the increase in number of days of observation. So this can only be possible. I have to set my DC cutoff value of anode current, and for that I can get the knowledge of how much more time I can use at what particular phase. For that, now threshold energy will also increase due to the phase of the moon. At that particular phase of the moon, my threshold energy is 56 GeV. So this is a disadvantage because earlier it was 20 GeV, now it is 56 GeV. So gamma rays which are coming less than 56 GeV, I cannot detect from the MACE telescope. So to sum up, anode current and energy threshold changes with respect to the phase of the moon, separation between the moon and the source, and zenith distance of the moon and the source respectively. So observational time can be increased by considering the partial moonlight, but as I have mentioned that at the cost of DC background, my DC background will increase, and this will correspond to an increase in threshold energy. So thank you. Hope you all have enjoyed this.
Thank you, Mani. Amit Shukla has raised his hand. Go ahead, Amit, for the question.
Thank you, Sita. Hi. So I believe you have already considered the zenith angle threshold change in your calculation, right?
Yes.
Oh, that is considered. Okay, fine. And one more thing, what will be the limit for the maze, that how much crescent with crescent moon it can observe? How much percent?
Like right now we are not in the mode of in application mode with the moon. Right now we are working with the moonless night only. Further, in this stage I have only studied the two parameters. Further I have to study more parameters, for example sensitivity, you can say. So after that I can try to implement this thing, and then we can operate.
Yeah. So following up on the same thing, I did not understand. Let's say moon is rising and we have a high zenith angle, and you have some separation of 9 degree or 10 degree. But when the moon is on the zenith, and at the same time, if you have a same separation, what will be the difference in the thresholds? Or they will be the same?
It depends upon the separation and the phase. So if that is fixed, as you are saying, the separation is fixed and the phase is fixed.
Yeah. Okay, maybe. Yeah.
And maybe I'm not able to get it.
Yeah, it's fine.
No,
Fine.
Mani, the question here is, although the separation remains the same, right? Whatever be the thing during a night, however, the moon will rise and set.
Okay, phase is
So when
changing.
it is over the zenith, will it have much more effect on the threshold than when it is on the near the horizon? That's the question.
Yeah,
That angle also taken into account.
yeah. So if it is at the zenith or it is anywhere else, it will have the same effect until and unless my phase is and separation is same. If my phase is changing over like overnight, then it will affect my anode current because I have to point towards my source. So if my moon is at that particular separation, so yeah, I have to consider that effect. If it is at zenith, the scattering will be less. So I have to consider that effect as well. But at the near the horizon, the scattering will be more. So the effect will change. It will vary.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, hope I am able to give the correct answer.
Yeah, fine.
Any other questions from anybody else? If not, thank you once again, Mani, and please look into the Slack in case there are some other queries, so you can answer them. Thank you, and I'll hand it over back to the organizers, I think, and thanks also to Abhirup Datta who helped in the organizing of this session.
Thanks a lot.
And now I hand it over back to them. I think it's now time for poster session. Yeah.